Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2022 horror film, Smile. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Brock for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below. And I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, Smile is a film that, to be perfectly honest, I was not that enthusiastic about at all. I didn't like the trailer. Uh, I thought it looked really generic. It reminded me of crap like Truth or Dare. And it seemed like a large chunk of it was relying too much upon this kind of dumb gimmick of people smiling and making that creepy, because that's something that, to me personally, has been done to death over the years in horror. So I didn't really think they were going to do a whole lot new with it. And I just thought it was going to be a generic, lame, jump scare, typical supernatural horror movie. And I finally did check it out, and I gave it a fair shot, and I ultimately wound up liking the movie. I wouldn't say I loved it. I would have liked it a lot more if it landed the ending, if the ending wasn't as much of a face plant as it was. But I still liked the film, and that's more than I expected, considering I wasn't really a fan of the trailer or a fan of the concept. It really didn't do much for me. Now, the film is directed by a first time filmmaker in Parker Finn, who also wrote the film. And Parker Finn did an absolutely fantastic job with this film in terms of the direction. This is some of the most impressive and incredible direction from a first time director I've seen in a long time. The way that he handled so many difficult, ambitious shots in this was just astounding. I mean, there's a lot of sequences where he's not only moving the camera around different directions, tilting it, flipping it upside down. He's also shooting from top-down views. He's shooting from the ground up. It's just a impressive feat of filmmaking by Parker Finn. And a big reason why I like the film is really just for Parker Finn's direction, just to see what kind of tricks that he had up his sleeve, just to see what kind of crazy camera technique he was going to go for next. He even threw in different point of views. Just a really good film to watch when it comes to just the visual style and the flair. So yeah, I'm anticipating whatever he does next just for the visuals, just for the direction, because it was that good in this film. Like, his direction in this is the kind of stuff that makes me smile from ear to ear as a film fan. I just adored his direction in this. It was amazing. He deserves way more appreciation and way more credit for what he did here. Um and the script is still pretty good too. Based on a short story and a short film that he also wrote and directed called Laura uh, Hasn't Slept. And the script, I will say, is pretty good because of the fact that for the most part it nails it. It just doesn't quite nail it when it comes to the ending. Because I think it really does a good job with character building, in particular the lead. It really does a fantastic job making you sympathize with Rose and her plight and what's going on with her in her life when she's cursed with this entity that's just making her life miserable and tormenting her and targeting her and making her next on its list of depravity and murder and all kinds of craziness. And I like the fact that she's a therapist and she's working with a lot of people who deal with extreme cases of mental illness. And I like that she had a past with mental illness, and I think yeah, it was her mother who was mentally ill who actually committed suicide, and you get a lot of extra details in terms of how she handled that situation when she was a kid, and that leads to a lot of grief that she's dealing with that you could insinuate as being the basis for this horror that she's facing, and it leads to a lot of people around her, especially her sister, having serious doubts about her mental health. And I just like how things build. I like how this script builds on not only character depth, but also a lot of the elements of the story involving the horror, involving the smile curse and the entity that's the cause of it. And it just felt like a old school kind of horror movie. It really did. It felt like a horror film you would see in the 90s or the late 80s in terms of the way that the script is structured, with the opening of the film and then going further with the trip down the terror, so to speak. And it's just one of those things where it doesn't shy away from a lot of stuff. Like, it shows the just sheer intensity and just unbelievable nature of mental illness and how it could just be so overwhelming and destructive in numerous different ways. And I do like the fact that it doesn't really rely solely upon the people smiling and being creepy and saying, "You're gonna die." Like, it doesn't solely rely upon that when it comes to its scares. There's a lot of stuff that's more insidious in nature, stuff that just gets under your skin. Um, and speaking of under your skin, when they finally reveal the smile entity, initially it's kind of silly, looked like a gangly, super tall Marilyn Manson. It just looked kind of laughable. But once it reveals its true nature and it pulls its skin off, that was some crazy ass shit. So I will give the script that. Once it gives that reveal in the finale, that was definitely worth it. Despite the fact that it was a fairly predictable finale, and then the times when it wasn't predictable, other than that moment, were honestly mostly a total fail. Um, but yeah, I like the slow burn nature of the script. I like the fact that it kind of lulls you into this sort of false sense of security. It makes that scene where her patient just snaps and cuts her face off, basically with a piece of glass, and makes that even more intense and just disturbing because of the way that it just kind of lulls you into this false sense of security until it just gives you that moment that just grabs you by the throat. And I like the investigative nature of the script involving the lead, Rose, trying to figure out what's going on, try to piece together the different pieces of the puzzle, and working with her cop colleague. And I think that if the film nailed the ending, then it would be a genuine classic because it does have a good hook with this smile curse. The investigation with the cop is really compelling, especially once they go further down the rabbit hole. And it has some genuine moments of creepy tension that really tap into that fear of being watched by something that you can't see or you only see it briefly, similar to the kind of scares that were in It Follows, which I also thought was a really good film. And you have all these good building blocks for something that is really special when it comes to the script, but it just just kind of fumbles it away in the end with an ending that just feels like a clusterfuck of different concepts and ideas that never really pieced together well. Like it's this whole sort of cop out moment where she faced her grief of letting her mother die and not calling the ambulance because she couldn't take and couldn't stand facing her mental illness every day, and she was too young and she couldn't handle it. And you could argue that the entity is just a further extension of all of this. And she faces her fear and she burns the entity, and then she also burns away that grief and that guilt, and now she can finally move forward. But no, it's a cop out. It's none of that happened. She's just back outside her old house, and she winds up becoming a victim of the entity and succumbs to the entity, and the entity takes her over and she kills herself. And then the next person in line is her cop friend, and somebody who I think could have been a potential love interest for her at one point. I think it's insinuated that they did date at one point, and she really did have a lot of feelings for him. But yeah, you have Greg. Yeah, the uh, the cop friend. No, Greg's a different guy. Yeah, it's Joel. Yeah, Joel is her. Yeah, Joel is the one that gets the entity passed down to him, and now he's the one with the smile curse because he saw her commit suicide. And I'm just like, really? You're gonna go with that route? The typical horror, modern horror film route where everyone's fucked, everyone's dead, and the curse lives on. I'm just like, really? Like, that was so disappointing. And I think there was something there with the entity and the scene where the entity reveals itself, and it's got these faces on top of faces, and it's just a really creepy bit of imagery. And so is that scene where it essentially rips open her face like she's Stretch Armstrong and starts burrowing itself into her body. Like that's some really intense, just messed up stuff, and some really mind-bending, crazy imagery. And then you just do a typical, she smiles, creepy, she lights herself on fire. And I'm like, you had a serious missed opportunity here to have a definitive ending to this film instead of having like some sequel bait bullshit. Because I don't really feel this is a concept that really is going to work for a franchise. So I think what honestly Parker should have done here is you should have ended the film with a more concrete ending. Instead of having the cop out stuff with her facing her grief, and then the grief manifests itself into this thing. Uh, well, I mean, you could still have the grief manifest itself into the smile entity, but not have it be a cop out where it seems like none of that ever happened. So instead, you cut out the this didn't happen stuff, and don't even have the stuff involving her fighting back and lighting on a fire, and you just have her facing her grief and facing her fear and eventually succumbing to it. And then you have her cop colleague Joel, and he comes over and he sees what's going on, and he's already done his research, and you already know that he's done his research because he's been looking into these mysterious suicides, this string of suicides that are tied to the smile curse on his own time. So he knows about the guy who managed to escape the curse only by killing somebody and having somebody witness that murder. But now he's thinking about another way that he could potentially stop this curse for good, and that involves killing the entity. And how do you kill the entity? Well, when the entity has taken over its next victim, so to speak, and in this case it's Rose, If you kill the host before the entity is able to pass the curse on, then you kill the entity and you save the host's soul. And that leads to Joel shooting Rose and killing her, but in the process, killing the entity. And so in my head, he has the gun, he's hesitating, but she's about to light the match, and he just shoots her right in the forehead. And she falls back. She's dazed. The entity freaks out and essentially uh, rips its way out of her body spiritually, not physically, but it's just one of those sort of like bits of imagery where you see like some sort of like smoky or ethereal sort of creepy thing that just floods its way out of her body and up into the ceiling of the home and just disappears. And then her body falls back down onto the ground, and the smile then turns to just a still just grim, just dead normal face. Goes from creepy smile to just a normal still face. And that insinuates that she's not doomed to be tormented by this entity. Her soul is saved, and she's no longer around, and she's dead, and she's passed on, but now she's not going to be in any sort of purgatory, or if there is a heaven and a hell, she's not going to go to hell because she killed herself, that kind of stuff. Her soul is at rest, and she's at peace, and the entity is destroyed. I think that would be a much better ending. It deals with a lot of conflict with Joel because he loves her and he doesn't know if he wants to go through with it, but he knows that if he doesn't, then her soul is doomed, and he's doomed, and so is anyone else that is cursed by this entity. So he just realizes he's gotta do it. He's gotta pull the trigger and take that risk, and it pays off. I like that concept. I think it's a good idea. It's a good way to end the movie. Instead of this sort of sequel bait bullshit that's just depressing and just makes the film feel kind of pointless in terms of everything that happened up until that point. And I think in all honesty, the ending, the more I think about it, it really does suck. And it does, in a lot of ways, kind of undermine a lot of the other positives that the story and the script had up until that point. But there's enough things with this script, enough moments of creepy, eerie scares and intrigue and character depth that makes it that this isn't something that's completely crippling, but it definitely does provide a bit of a blow to the film and to the effectiveness of the script. And I think if it wasn't for Parker Finn's direction and some of the other things that I liked about this film, the ending could have been something that was bad enough that just completely uh, uh, undermine the entire thing. But that's not really what happened for me. I still like the movie despite the ending, but I would have loved the film if it had an ending closer to what I described. Um, but they ended it in the way that they did because they wanted it to be a franchise, and the movie was a huge hit. Paramount wasn't even initially planning on releasing this in theaters. They were gonna release it direct to streaming on Paramount Plus, but test screening went really well, so they decided to release in theaters. And boy, did that pay off because it made over $200 million. So it made a huge amount of money for the studio. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a sequel that's announced. even though I don't think it needs a sequel, and I don't really think there's much you can do with a sequel. But that's just me. Um, but yeah, like I said, for the most part, it's a solid script, but there are some moments that definitely do make me frown. I'm not gonna lie. The cast, I think for the most part, other than probably Jessie T. Usher, and that's because Jessie T. Usher sucks. He's a shitty actor. But other than him, I think the cast all relatively do good jobs here. I think they deliver good, if not great, performances at times, especially Sosie Bacon, Kevin Bacon's daughter. I thought she was really good in this. I really did buy a lot of the things that she was dealing with internally and mentally, and just the struggle that she was going through. And it felt very real and genuine because her performance was legitimately great. Caitlin Stasey, she has a very, very small role as Laura, the girl who flips and cuts herself in at the hospital, but she really made the most out of it. She made a definite impression with how she uh, handled the grief and the angst of her character, and also when she turns, when the entity has control of her. These actors and these actresses were asked to smile in a way where they were dead in the eyes. So it looked like they were dead inside, and it was almost predatory in nature. And so that made it kind of different than something like Truth or Dare or some of these other films that have creepy smiles. So they specifically had them just, total dead inside, just nothing but, just soulless dead eyes and creepy smile. But they did a good job with it. They did. It was freaky. And it was all done for real. There was no CGI, there was nothing like that. They all did it for real. Um Kyle Gallner, I really liked as Joel. I thought he did a really good job here. I thought his performance was definitely one of the better performances when it comes to the entire film. And I've liked Kyle Gallner. He was one of the few good things about the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. So it was nice to see him in another horror film. It was nice to see him have a pretty meaty role, and I thought he had some good chemistry with Rose, with Sosie, and that's why I honestly would have liked to have seen his role expanded upon even more, because I thought the two worked together so well. And that's why I would have liked to have that moment of conflict at the end where he's like, oh my God, I love her. I realized that I love Rose, and not just as a friend. I love her, and I've got to kill her. I have to kill her in order to save her and to save everyone else and to save myself. Um, Definitely liked his dynamic with Sosie a lot more than Jessie T. Usher. That's because Jessie T. Usher can't act. He's a terrible actor. He has no chemistry with Sosie, and they're supposed to be engaged, and his character just comes across like an unlikable dickhead who doesn't want to believe her, doesn't want to trust her, doesn't want to be by her side because he just automatically assumes that she's crazy. Robin Weigert was also pretty solid as Rose's therapist. Kal Penn, he's in it for a little bit, but he doesn't really do a whole lot. He plays this other doctor who works at the hospital. Um, you also have this guy. I'm trying to remember who. Oh yeah, Rob Morgan. He plays Robert Talley, this guy who was sent to prison for killing somebody, but he initially was cursed by the entity, but he found a way out by killing some innocent person, making it as brutal of a crime as possible, so then he could pass it on to some other person. Yeah, Carl is this other guy played by Jack Sochet, who's this other patient in the hospital who's acting crazy, and he's the one that flips and says, you know, you're all gonna die, you're gonna die, while he's smiling and laughing. And I will admit that performance is a little not the best at times, especially that moment. Um, and there are a fair amount of moments by the actors, I will admit, that are a little too over the top in terms of the emotion. That really did kind of remind me of like an A24 horror film, which was not something I wanted to be reminded of. Where it's the over the top renditions of grief, or in the case of the Carl guy, uh, mental illness to the point where it just came across as forced. But most of the time, you don't really get that kind of line delivery. But there are moments where that does happen, and I think that's kind of where the director's inexperience kind of comes into play. Because I think if Parker Finn had a few more films under his belt, he would then realize those things and be like, "Hey, you know, let's do another take," because that was a little too over the top. Because it just provides the wrong tone. Because you're like, is this supposed to be funny, or am I supposed to be disturbed or unnerved by this? And if it's making me laugh, then that's not the good uh uh take. So for the most part, pretty good cast. Um, Cinematography by Charlie Saroff is nothing special, nothing spectacular, but it's there. It's decent enough. The shots are set up in ways that definitely do provide a nice amount of mood and atmosphere. Definitely does seem like the cinematographer and the director are on the same page. Same goes for the editing. I think Elliot Greenberg worked well with the director. And I would say the editing here I thought was excellent. I thought this had some really good editing in it, especially some of the transition shots in this. Some of the transitions were just really cool and unique and just impressively executed. So, yeah, overall, I would say this is a really well edited film. Um, and the movie's like 115 minutes, and it goes by at a relatively decent enough pace. It doesn't really get too boring, at least not for me personally, because it seems to have the right moment when to throw in a creepy scene with the smile entity stalking somebody or appearing in the corner of the room, or the moment you saw in the trailer where the girl walks up to the window and knocks on it and her head spins. So you have a nice balance of those moments. So you have a lot of heavy drama dealing with mental illness and dealing with the fear of hereditary mental illness. In a lot of ways, the this film is like Hereditary but done a million times better, because you sympathize more with the lead character. The supernatural elements are handled much better, and despite the clunky ending, it still feels more satisfying than something like that. Even though it's kind of a similar thing where the curse is inevitable and the curse is passed on no matter what. Almost like a Drag Me to Hell kind of thing. I've seen some people mention that, and I can kind of see it. You know, why it kind of reminds them of Drag Me to Hell. But I will take this over Drag Me to Hell too, because Drag Me to Hell, it didn't find the right balance of tone, and I didn't like the lead at all. So here, I did like Rose, and I felt for her, and it made the ending genuinely tragic instead of annoying. But I still feel it could have been even more effective if they just went a different direction with the ending. But yeah, a good, nice little slow burn horror thriller that does have some moments where the jump scares are there and present, but they're not all over the place, and it's not a jump scare horror film like the trailer might suggest. And it's not a body count movie, so if you're going into that, you're not going to get that with this movie. And it's just one of those things where I think for what it is, it's a well crafted, relatively well executed horror film. It definitely has some moments that really do creep you out and give you goosebumps and make you think and just stick with you, especially the smile monster for me. Like when it rips its skin off and shows its true form, like that's something that's going to stick with me for a bit. And I think it was all done practical too. I don't think that was a CGI effect, that creature. Um, but yeah, that's my thoughts on Smile. And until next time, as always, I'll see you later. See ya.